The pain of loss is inevitable. When someone we love leaves, we feel a deep emptiness, an absence that seems impossible to fill. We lose parents, siblings, friends, and in some cases even children. Time may pass, but the longing remains, and we wonder, how can we move on without carrying this weight forever? The pain of loss can take many forms, but nothing compares to the pain of losing a child. It doesn't matter whether it was a child or an adult. There is no logic, no explanation that can comfort. A parent shouldn't bury a child. The natural cycle of life teaches us that the oldest leave first. But when this cycle is reversed, everything inside us breaks. How can we go on living when the one we carried in our arms, raised and loved unconditionally, is no longer here? But the truth is that in any farewell, pain is present. Losing a husband or wife, someone who has been by our side for decades, with whom we have built memories, bonds, and a lifetime, makes us feel as if we have lost part of ourselves. And when parents go, even when we're adults, we realize that we're suddenly orphans, without that safe haven that was always there, without the voice that guided us, without the gaze that accompanied us from the beginning of the journey. And then we are left with a heavy silence, an emptiness that seems impossible to fill. How do we move on without this presence that was so essential in our lives? How do we learn to live with this absence? Sadhguru, a spiritual master who has been sharing teachings on life and death for decades, reminds us that suffering doesn't come from death itself, but from the way we relate to it. For those of us who remain, the pain of saying goodbye can be overwhelming. But would those who have left want to see us trapped in suffering? If you've been through this experience or fear facing it, know that the pain of loss is not about the one who left, but about us who remain. Sadhguru teaches us that we suffer because we cling to the idea of permanence, to the illusion that those we love will be with us forever. But the truth is that life doesn't work like that. Everything in existence follows a flow. We are born, we grow, we live, and inevitably, we leave. Suffering arises when we resist this reality, when we refuse to accept what has always been natural. Does that mean we should ignore pain? Not at all. Grief is real, longing is inevitable, but there is a difference between feeling the pain of loss and being consumed by it. Today, let's reflect together on Sadhguru's profound teachings that can help us deal with loss and transform our perspective on death. The death of a child, the most difficult pain to bear. There is no deeper pain than that of a parent who loses a child. It doesn't matter whether it was a child or an adult, whether it was sudden or a slow farewell. The feeling is that something has been ripped from the chest, leaving an emptiness that is impossible to fill. The natural order of life seems to have been broken, and the mind refuses to accept this reality. Mourning the loss of a child is an abyss of unanswered questions. Why him and not me? What could I have done to prevent it? What meaning is there in life if my own son left before I did? These questions, so human, are echoes of a pain that seems unbearable. But Sadhguru invites us to look at this pain in a different way. He reminds us that the intensity of suffering comes from the depth of love. The question then becomes, how do we transform this love into something that strengthens us, rather than destroys us? Life is not guaranteed for anyone. Every moment we've had with those we love has been a gift. Instead of mourning what we've lost, we should remember what we've had. These words may sound difficult in the moment of grief, but they carry an essential truth. None of us has control over how long another person lives. We don't choose when someone comes into the world, just as we can't prevent their departure. What is in our hands is how we choose to remember and carry that absence. The death of a child often brings with it an overwhelming sense of guilt. Did I do everything I could? I should have protected more. If I'd done something different, maybe he'd still be here. But Sadhguru teaches us that we don't hold the fate of others in our hands. Each being's life takes its own course, and no amount of love or protection can change that. Guilt traps us in endless suffering, but it doesn't change what has happened. Accepting this doesn't mean forgetting or erasing the pain. It just means recognizing that the love we feel doesn't have to turn into guilt or destruction, but can become a reminder of what was lived, what was shared, and what still lives inside us. When we lose a child, it seems that life itself loses its meaning. But Sadhguru asks us an important question. If your son were here, would he want to see you trapped in eternal suffering? The answer is clear. True love does not want to imprison, but to liberate. This doesn't mean that mourning has to have a deadline or that the pain has to disappear. But it does mean that we can gradually transform this pain into a legacy of love. We can keep the memory alive, not only with tears but also with gratitude. Every laugh we shared, every hug we gave, every moment we had with that person continues to exist within us. And it's up to us to decide whether these memories will be a burden or a source of strength. Sadhguru reminds us that death does not destroy the love we feel for someone. He states, "The body may go, but what you have built with someone never disappears. It lives on in you, in your heart, in your energy, in your choices. A child never stops being part of their parents. Their laughter, their essence, their stories continue within those who remain. And honoring that existence doesn't mean getting lost in sadness, but rather finding ways to carry that love with dignity, even in the face of pain. Time does not erase nostalgia, but we can choose to turn this absence into a memory of love rather than a burden of eternal suffering. Because in the end, the best way to keep someone alive within us is not by mourning their absence, but by living in a way that honors their presence. When we lose a husband or wife, a marriage is more than living together. It's a daily construction, made up of gestures, of silent glances that say everything, of an intertwined routine that over time becomes part of who we are. When a partner leaves, you don't just lose one person, you lose an entire story. The shared breakfast, the conversations, before bedtime, the little details that went unnoticed in everyday life. Suddenly everything becomes a painful absence. The house, which used to be full of life, can seem empty. Daily habits, once natural, now become reminders of an irreparable loss. The empty chair at the table, the lack of a response to a spontaneous comment, the silence that fills the rooms. Longing manifests itself unexpectedly, sometimes through a smell, a song, or a memory that comes without warning. Many people who lose a husband or wife describe the pain as an amputation, as if a part of themselves had been taken away. And in a way it has. After all, a shared life doesn't disappear overnight. But how do you move on when you've traveled halfway alongside someone who is no longer here? Sadhguru teaches us that true love doesn't depend on physical presence to continue existing. The body may leave, but what has been built between two souls never disappears. He tells us, if the person you love has left, you have two options. Turn that loss into a weight that imprisons you, or allow that love to continue to exist within you, lighting your way. Many people believe that moving on means forgetting, but that's not the case. Overcoming pain doesn't mean erasing the past, but learning to carry it in a way that doesn't destroy those who remain. Love can remain, not as suffering, but as a living memory of what was beautiful and meaningful. One of the greatest difficulties after the loss of a spouse is dealing with loneliness. For many, that partner was the person with whom they shared everything, the joys, the difficulties, the doubts. Without that presence, life seems to lose its meaning. But Sadhguru invites us to an important reflection. The pain you feel is proportional to the beauty of what you have experienced. And if something was so beautiful that it hurts so much now, that means it was worth it. This doesn't mean that life should stop. Moving on is not a betrayal of the memory of the departed. On the contrary, it is the greatest tribute we can pay. Continuing to live fully, with love, with gratitude, is the best way to honor those who have walked beside us. The death of a spouse may seem like the end of a story, but perhaps it's just a new chapter. This doesn't mean that the longing will disappear or that the pain will cease to exist, but it does mean that we can choose how to carry this absence. Will it be a burden that prevents us from living or a fuel that inspires us to carry on? Every moment shared, every memory, every lesson can become a force that drives us forward. Instead of looking at the empty chair and feeling sad, we can remember the laughter that was exchanged there. Instead of avoiding a place for fear of the memories, we can visit that space with gratitude for what was experienced. Sadhguru teaches us the best way to keep someone alive inside you is not through pain, but through celebrating what that person brought to your life. There is no right time for mourning, nor is there a rule on how to move on. But little by little it is possible to transform absence into a space of gratitude. Because in the end, true love doesn't end with death. It just changes form. The loss of a parent, when we become orphans in adulthood. No matter how old we are, losing a parent makes us feel like children again, but this time without the lap and comfort that was always there. Even when we're adults, when we've built our own families and become independent, the presence of our parents gives us a sense of stability. They are our first shelter, our first safe haven. When they leave, we feel as if a foundation has been ripped out from under us. For many, the loss of a parent is the real milestone of adulthood, because it's then that we realize that we are, in fact, the next in line. There is no longer anyone above us to protect us, to give us advice, to remind us of things that only they would remember. It's as if we suddenly find ourselves alone in the world, even though we have our own family. The feeling of orphanhood in adulthood is not only emotional, but also psychological. Even when we no longer needed our parents to look after us, the simple fact of knowing that they were there brought us comfort. Their voices on the phone, their repeated gestures, their stories that we've heard so many times, all this becomes part of who we are. And when they go, a piece of us goes too. But Sadhguru reminds us, your parents never wanted you to live trapped in sadness. The best way to honor them is to live with dignity, happiness and love, because that's what they wanted for you from the beginning. As children, we depend completely on our parents. As we grow up, the relationship changes, but it never disappears. We go from being protected to protectors. At some point, it is they who begin to depend on us, and the role is reversed. And then comes the inevitable moment of farewell. The death of parents, however painful, follows the natural cycle of life. We know that at some point they will leave before we do, but when that moment arrives, logic does not reduce the pain. Longing takes over, and the heart refuses to accept the absence. Grief can be intense, and everyone experiences it differently. Some feel alone, others feel lost, and many regret not having spent more time with their parents while they were alive. But Sadhguru teaches us that regret can't change the past. What we can change is the way we carry that memory for the rest of our lives. Many people ask themselves, how can I go on without them? How can I fill the void that remains? The answer lies not in forgetting or trying to replace what has been lost, but in honoring their memory in the best possible way. If they were loving parents, let's remember the love they gave us. If they were strict parents, perhaps now we can understand the challenges they faced. If they were absent or failed us in some way, perhaps we can find learning in that. Sadhguru reminds us that death should not be seen as the end of a bond. What our parents gave us, values, teachings, love, is still alive within us. If a parent wished their children to be happy, then the greatest tribute we can pay is to live that happiness. Don't mourn them with regret, but with gratitude. Live the way they would have wanted you to live. Turn longing into love and absence into strength. If we can do that, then they never really left us. Their legacy is not just in the memories, but in the way we move on, carrying within us everything they meant, the feeling of guilt after the death of a loved one. I could have done more. Did he know how much I loved him? What if I had said something different that day? These questions echo in the minds of those who have lost a loved one, making mourning even more painful. For many, death brings not only the pain of absence, but also the weight of regret. Grief is often accompanied by this feeling of guilt, a suffocating sense that something more could have been done, that perhaps we had failed that person in some way. We think of the moments when we could have been more present, the words not said, the fights that could have been avoided. Our hearts fill with what if, as if reliving every moment could change what happened. But Sadhguru teaches us that death never happens before its time. Everyone's time in this world is already set from birth. If we understood this, we wouldn't drown in guilt. Instead, we would turn this pain into learning so that we can live more consciously from now on. One of the reasons we feel guilt is because we believe we have more control than we really do. We think we could have avoided death if we had done something differently. But the truth is that none of us can stop the course of life. Death arrives when it has to, regardless of our actions. Sadhguru explains that life and death are not at our command. They follow a natural flow. Just as we don't choose when someone is born, we don't choose when someone leaves. Does this mean we should ignore the pain? No. But it does mean that we must learn to accept that we are not responsible for anyone's fate. Love cannot prevent death, just as it cannot prevent the leaves from falling in the fall or the sun from setting at the end of the day. Instead of imprisoning ourselves in guilt, we can use it as an invitation to live with more presence, more love and more truth. Sadhguru invites us to reflect. If the person who left could talk to you now, would they want you to live carrying that weight? The answer is obvious. Those we love wouldn't want to see us trapped in suffering. Instead, they would like us to continue living fully, learning from the experience so that we never stop showing love while we have time. If we feel we could have done something differently, let's use it as a reminder for the present and the future. If we didn't say how much we loved someone, let this teach us to say, "I love you," without fear to those who are still here. If we feel we weren't as present as we should have been, may this motivate us to be closer to those who are still part of our lives. If we regret words said in moments of anger, may we learn to be kinder, more patient, more understanding. Guilt can be a chain that binds us to the past, or it can be a teacher that teaches us to live more consciously from now on with the people who are still here. Losing a loved one is inevitable, but instead of looking at this farewell with regret, we can choose to see it as an invitation to transformation. Sadhguru teaches us that death reminds us that time is fleeting and that we must live with intensity and presence. The best way to honor those who have gone is not by carrying guilt, but by living in a way that would make sense to them. We can turn pain into gratitude, regret into learning, and loss into a reason to cherish every moment with those who are still by our side. After all, if there's one thing that death teaches us, it's that the time we have is precious and shouldn't be wasted on what is past, but rather invested in what can still be lived. Grief doesn't just bring sadness and longing. It is often accompanied by a silent revolt, a deep sense of injustice. Why did this happen to me? Why did God take this person and not another? If there is an order to the universe, why was this pain put in my way? This anger can be directed at God, at life, at fate, at chance. It's as if an invisible force has taken away something that was essential to us, without explanation or warning. Grief can make us question the existence of any logic in the universe, leading us to feel that we have been betrayed by life itself. But Sadhguru invites us to reflect. Death is not a punishment. It is not a divine punishment. It's just the other side of life. From childhood, we are taught to believe that there is a kind of moral balance in life. If we do good, good things will happen. If we love someone, they will be there for us. If we are right, we will be rewarded. But when death happens unexpectedly, brutally or senselessly, this belief is shattered, leaving a void of incomprehension and anger. Sadhguru teaches us that life does not follow the rules we create for it. The universe does not operate under human concepts of justice or injustice. Death doesn't happen to punish or to test our faith. It simply happens because it is part of the natural flow of existence. Just as the sun rises and sets, as the waves of the sea come and go, life and death are part of the same cycle. Resisting this only prolongs suffering. Feeling angry with life or God is not wrong. It's natural, human. But if we hold on to this anger, we become hostages to pain. When we feed this feeling for too long, it doesn't bring us answers. On the contrary, it paralyzes us, distances us from what can still be experienced, and prevents us from finding peace. Suffering becomes an even greater burden when we sustain it with indignation. But how do we deal with this revolt? How do we move on without feeling that we've been wronged? The answer lies not in fighting death, but in understanding that life has never been about control, but about acceptance. Sadhguru reminds us that we have no control over existence. What we do have is the power to decide how we react to what happens to us. We can cling to anger and become prisoners of pain, or we can accept that everything is part of a bigger cycle, even if we can't understand it at the moment. Acceptance doesn't mean not feeling pain. It just means that we don't resist the flow of life. When we stop fighting reality, we find space to heal, to remember with love, to move on without carrying the weight of revolt. Life gave us this person. We had moments with her, we learned, we grew, we shared. Nothing can take that away from us. Death can take a body, but it can't take what was built. When we look at life from this perspective, the question changes. Instead of "why did this happen to me?" we start asking, how can I honor this person by living as well as possible? Grief dissolves when we stop resisting the inevitable and learn to carry the memory of the departed, not with anger, but with love and gratitude. After all, life never promised us eternity. It only gave us moments, and it's up to us to decide how we're going to live them. The pain of losing someone unexpectedly. Death is always painful, but when it comes unexpectedly, the impact can be devastating. In an instant, everything changes. There are no goodbyes, no time to prepare. An accident, a sudden health problem, some kind of fatality, and suddenly, someone who was part of your life is gone. The mind goes into shock. At first, it's hard to believe. This can't be happening. It wasn't the right time. Yesterday we were together, and now he's gone? Reality seems distorted, as if we're trapped in a nightmare from which at any moment we're going to wake up. But time passes, and we realize that this is, in fact, the new reality. When a loss happens in this way, in addition to sadness, there's also a whirlwind of feelings. Guilt for words that weren't said, regret for moments that weren't lived, anger at not having had the chance to do anything. The pain is accompanied by a feeling of absolute powerlessness. But Sadhguru reminds us of something essential. There are no guarantees in life. Those you love can leave at any time. If you understand this, you will treat them with more love and presence today because there is no certainty about tomorrow. We live as if we had all the time in the world. We put off conversations. We postpone meetings. We distance ourselves. Over petty quarrels, we assume that there will always be a next time. But when death comes without warning, this illusion is brutally shattered. Sadhguru teaches us that the uncertainty of life should not be a reason to fear, but rather to become more aware of how we are living. If we knew that today would be the last time we would see someone, would we say the same words? Would we act in the same way? The problem is not the unexpected death, but the fact that we don't live as if it could happen at any moment. Sudden loss teaches us to be more present. We can't change what has happened, but we can use this pain as a reminder that life is fragile, that every moment matters, and that we never know when we will see someone for the last time. Sadhguru invites us to reflect. If every interaction was your last, how would you treat that person? The pain of unexpected loss doesn't go away, but it can teach us to live more deeply, more presently, and with more love. The greatest difficulty in dealing with sudden death is the feeling that something has been interrupted prematurely. But Sadhguru reminds us that life doesn't follow our expectations. It has its own rhythm, its own flow. None of us can predict the future or prevent death. What we can do is accept that we have no control over anyone's time, only over how we choose to live the moments we have. Those who have left without warning cannot come back. But if we are aware of what this loss has taught us, we can ensure that those who are still with us will receive all the love and presence we once took for granted. Because at the end of the day, the greatest lesson of sudden death is that the only thing we really have is now. And it's up to us to decide how we're going to live it. The death of someone essential can leave us feeling directionless. When we lose someone who was part of our daily lives, who accompanied us for years and was a central part of our history, there is an emptiness that seems impossible to fill. Grief can swallow us up completely, making us feel that nothing makes sense anymore. Suddenly the world moves on, but inside us, everything seems to have stopped. What once had color now seems gray. What once brought joy now becomes just a reminder of absence. The inevitable question arises, how can we go on living when the one who was part of our life is no longer here? Sadhguru reminds us, the death of someone should not mean the death of your life. The best gift you can give to the departed is to continue living, growing, and finding beauty in existence. Grief can trap us in a kind of paralysis. Some people feel guilty about moving on, as if living meant betraying the memory of the one who has gone. Others lose interest in everything, because everything seems empty without that presence. But the truth is that life goes on, whether we like it or not. Time doesn't stop for us to recover. The world turns, the days go by, and, if we're not careful, we can spend years trapped in pain without realizing that we're still alive. Sadhguru teaches that life has a natural flow, and resisting it only increases suffering. Death has happened. The question now is not, how do I avoid the pain? But how do I transform this pain into something that allows me to go on? There is a deep fear in letting go of grief. Many people feel that if they stop grieving, they will be erasing the importance of the departed. But this is an illusion. Love is not measured by the pain we carry, but by the way we choose to keep the memory of the person we love alive. If the person who left loved us, they would want us to live on, not in any way, not with an unbearable burden, but in a full, dignified way, finding new meanings for our existence. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying the memory of that person lightly, as a reminder of what they meant to us, and not as a burden that prevents us from living. What's left? When we lose someone, we focus on what has been taken from us, but what about what we still have? If we look around, we'll see that there are still people who love us, that there are still moments to live, that life, even without that person, is still pulsating. It may not be easy to see this in the midst of pain, but little by little it is possible. Sadhguru says, if you've lost someone, use it as a reminder that you're still alive. Don't waste that gift. The greatest tribute we can pay to those who have gone is not to carry their absence as a burden, but to allow their existence to continue within us as a flame that drives us to go on, to live, and to find beauty in what is yet to come. How do we deal with special dates after a loss? When someone we love leaves, special dates become moments of silence and longing. Birthdays, holidays, and celebrations that were once filled with joy now carry a weight that is hard to bear. What used to be a day of reunion and happiness turns into a painful reminder of absence. The first birthday without that person, the first Christmas, the first New Year, each of these dates brings with it an emptiness that seems irreplaceable. The house may be full, but we still miss a single presence. The desire to relive the past, to have one more moment, to hear that voice again can make those days even more difficult. But Sadhguru teaches us that the way we deal with these dates is up to us. Remember the person not for what was taken from you, but for what they brought to your life. This means that we have a choice. We can spend these dates immersed in pain, or we can turn them into moments of homage and gratitude. Often, without realizing it, we turn these dates into days of suffering. We avoid celebrations, isolate ourselves, and relive the pain of loss over and over again. But is this the best way to remember someone who has gone? If that person were here, would they want to see us stuck in grief, or would they prefer us to remember them with love, to find a greater meaning for that day? Pain is inevitable, but prolonging it is a choice. And instead of making these dates a burden, we can use them to strengthen our connection with the departed. One way of dealing with these dates is to turn them into moments of remembrance and celebration of the life of the person who has gone. Instead of avoiding them or treating them as days of absolute sadness, we can use them to remember everything that person meant to us. Some ways to do this include getting together with friends and family to share good memories, talking about the person who has gone, recalling stories, laughing and crying together can make the longing lighter. Create a ritual in honor of the person, lighting a candle, listening to special music, visiting a place they liked, or doing something they enjoyed can be a way of keeping their presence alive. Do something meaningful in their name, helping someone, making a donation, planting a tree, creating something beautiful in her memory can transform the pain of absence into a gesture of love. The aim is not to forget or minimize the longing, but to find a new meaning for these dates, so that they are not just about loss, but also about gratitude for what was experienced. Sadhguru reminds us that death does not erase the connection we have with the departed. What was lived, the shared experiences, the love that existed between us, remain within us. If, instead of focusing on the absence, we focus on the presence that this person had in our lives, These dates can become less painful. We can choose to remember with sadness or with gratitude. We can let the pain take over, or we can turn these moments into heartwarming memories. In the end, the best way to honor someone we love is to ensure that their memory is a guiding light, not a weight that holds us back, when others seem to be moving on and we're still stuck in the pain. Grieving is a lonely process. At first, it seems that everyone around us shares our pain. Friends and family offer support, words of comfort and presence, but as time goes by, life goes on for them. Routines return to normal, smiles reappear, and little by little the departed is no longer often mentioned. And then we find ourselves alone with our pain. The world turns, but inside us everything seems to have stopped. What was once a refuge in the company of others now becomes a reminder of the distance between our pain and the life that goes on outside. We ask ourselves, how can they move on while I still feel so much? The pain of bereavement is not measured by time. Everyone has their own way of processing it. Some people find solace quickly, others take years to feel that they have really moved on. Grief has no universal clock. But Sadhguru teaches us something essential. Grief has no certain time to end, but it must run its course. If you allow it to, grief will turn into learning, and learning will turn into peace. It's natural to feel sadness, longing, and even anger when we realize that others seem to have overcome their loss while we still carry an immense weight on our chests. But there is a silent danger in this feeling, the risk of clinging to the pain as a way of keeping the memory of the departed alive. Some people unconsciously believe that moving on means forgetting, so they refuse to take new steps, to resume life, to allow joy to return. They believe that by holding on to the pain they are being faithful to the memory of the person who has gone. But would the departed want us to be trapped in grief? The fear of forgetting is understandable, but the truth is that it's not the pain that keeps someone alive inside us. It's the memories, the teachings, the moments shared. Sadhguru teaches us that sadness doesn't have to last forever, not because we forget, but because we learn to carry the memory more lightly. We can honor those we love in a different way, not with eternal tears, but with gratitude for everything they represented in our lives. If we still feel we can't move forward, there's no need to rush or feel guilty. Grief is a unique path for each person, and no one can tell us the right time to move on. But one thing is certain, life doesn't wait. We can choose to remain stuck in the past, or we can allow the memory of those we love to inspire us to live more meaningfully. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding a new purpose for life while lovingly carrying the memory of those who have gone. When we accept this, we realize that we're not leaving anyone behind, we're just walking on, carrying in our hearts everything we experienced alongside them. The connection with the departed never disappears. When someone we love leaves, the physical absence is painful. Suddenly, that person is no longer there to listen to us, to hug us, to share the simple moments of everyday life. We are left with questions that seem to have no answers. Does he still know that I love him? Does she miss me? Grief is often accompanied by the feeling of an abrupt break in the relationship we had with that person. But has that connection really broken down? Sadhguru teaches us, the body goes, but what has been built between two souls never disappears. This means that death cannot erase what has been lived, nor what has been shared. Love does not dissolve with physical absence. It continues to exist within us, in the gestures we learn, in the lessons we carry, in the way that person has changed us. If a person has touched us deeply, their impact never disappears. We can feel their presence in the way we speak, in the choices we make, in the words we hear from them that still echo in our minds. That mother who always told us to take a coat when we went out, that father who taught us to be strong, that friend who made us laugh in difficult times, all of these are still part of us. The body may be gone, but what we built together lives on. That's why many people feel that even after death, their loved ones are still close, not because they see or hear them, but because their presence is manifested in the small details of life. Sadhguru explains that it's not the pain that keeps someone alive inside us, but the awareness of what that person represented. When we focus on nostalgia, we feel emptiness, But when we focus on what was experienced, we find gratitude. Many cultures around the world believe that the connection between two people goes beyond physical existence. The bond we create doesn't disappear with death. It just takes on a new form. If we look inside ourselves, we realize that those we love are still there, in our way of seeing the world, influenced by them, in the love we feel and can still express, even if in a different way, in the values and principles we carry, which were often taught by them. If there's one thing that connects us to those who have gone, it's memory. But not memory as a burden, but as a guiding force. Sadhguru teaches us that when we understand that death doesn't destroy the connection we have with someone, mourning turns into gratitude. Instead of focusing on what has been lost, we can focus on what remains. We can choose to mourn every day that this person is no longer here, or we can celebrate the fact that we had the chance to know them, love them, and be loved by them. At the end of the day, nobody really leaves completely. If that person has left something inside us, be it a teaching, a memory, or a gesture of affection, then they are still here, alive in our essence. If we carry that with us, then death wasn't a final goodbye. It was just a change in the way this presence manifests itself, and whoever learns to feel that presence in a new way is never really alone. From the moment we are born, we are on a path that will one day come to an end. We know this rationally, but when death touches us closely, taking a father, a mother, a spouse, a dear friend, or, in the most incomprehensible pain, a child, it seems impossible to accept this truth. The heart refuses to accept what the mind knows, that life and death are part of the same cycle. Sadhguru reminds us that the pain of death comes not from the event itself, but from our resistance to accepting it as a natural part of existence. We don't suffer because someone has gone, but because we wish they were still here. We create such a deep attachment to the physical world that we forget that everything in life is transitory. And this illusion of permanence causes us suffering. Imagine a river. It doesn't stop, it doesn't remain static. The water that flowed yesterday is no longer there today. That's how we are too. Each one of us is a drop in the great flow of existence. Resisting death is like trying to hold water between your fingers. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it escapes. But is the problem death or the way we see it? From an early age, we learn to fear it. We avoid talking about it. We push the thought away whenever it arises. We create farewell rituals, and many cling to the pain as a way of maintaining the bond with the departed. But death doesn't have to be seen as an absolute tragedy. When we accept that it is a natural process, we can experience it more serenely. Sadhguru says, death does not destroy life, it only transforms its form. You can suffer from this transformation, or you can accept it as part of existence. Accepting death doesn't mean not missing it, not crying, or not suffering. It means understanding that we are born with limited time, and that sooner or later we will all leave. When we understand this, we begin to value life more. Time with those we love becomes more precious. Every conversation, every look, every hug takes on a new meaning. If we look at nature, we can see that everything follows a rhythm. The trees lose their leaves in the fall. The rivers dry up and renew themselves. The days end to make way for the night. Nothing fights against this. Only human beings cling to what is ephemeral, refuse to accept the inevitable, and suffer for something that was never under their control. Perhaps you've lost someone recently. Perhaps that pain is still strong, but think, what hurts more, the absence of that person or the fact that you wish they were still here? If it's the second option, it means that the pain is not in the loss itself, but in your resistance to accepting it. This doesn't mean that you should simply get over it or ignore the pain. It means that you can choose how to honor the memory of the departed. You can turn their absence into a burden, or you can remember them with love and gratitude. Death is not the end of what that person represented to you. What was shared, the love, the laughter, the experiences, all of this continues to exist within you. The challenge is to learn to carry these memories lightly, without them becoming a burden of pain. If we can see death as part of the flow of life, we start to live differently. We start to value the present more, to say, I love you without fear, to hug more intensely, to listen more patiently. After all, every moment we have with someone is unique, and one day it will only be a memory. Accepting death as part of existence doesn't make us cold or insensitive. On the contrary, it teaches us to live with more depth, more presence, and more love. Because in the end, what really matters is not the time we had with someone, but the way we lived that time. If this message has touched you, please comment below on how you see bereavement and how you overcame this phase, because your comment could help others. If you like it, like the video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive more reflections like this one. That way you won't miss out on any new content. Take care and see you next time.